The 9th chime faded, and the hallway went quiet, and Dorothy Carey Maddox stood in the dark, holding an envelope her dead father had sealed inside a clock he had wound every Sunday for longer than she had been alive. The grandfather clock was still vibrating, that low hum the tubular bells leave behind when the Westminster melody finishes its work. The hallway of the cottage in St. Michael's was narrow, barely wide enough for the clock and the woman standing in front of it, and the only light came from the kitchen behind her, a thin yellow bar across the floorboards. Through the window beside the front door, the sycamore in the yard was stripped nearly bare, and one last brown leaf ticked against the glass like a fingernail keeping time. Dorothy was 68 years old. Her hands were steady, but her jaw was set in a way that suggested she had been clenching it for days. In her right hand, she held a butter knife. Not a screwdriver, not a pry bar, a butter knife from the kitchen drawer. Because she had not planned this, and she was improvising, and that ordinary domestic detail said more about the moment than any tool from a hardware store could have. She had slid the flat blade along the seam of the pendulum housing, feeling for a gap that should not have been there, and on the 4th chime of the 9 o'clock hour, something had clicked. The housing panel had shifted a 1/4 inch outward, and she had caught it before it fell. Inside the cavity, behind the brass pendulum rod, there was a small manila envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed with tape that had gone brittle with age. On the front, in a trembling but legible hand, one word: Dorothy. She did not open it. Not yet. She held it against her sternum with both hands, closed her eyes, and stood there while the clock finished its chimes and the hallway settled into silence. Then she breathed out long and slow, the way you do when the thing you feared and the thing you hoped for turn out to be the same thing. The handwriting. That was what stopped her. She recognized it the way you recognize a voice in the dark. Immediately, completely, and with a grief that reopened everything. The slight leftward lean of the capital D. The careful, almost architectural way the letters connected. This was her father's writing. Her father, Howard Ellison Carey, had been dead for 19 days. 19 days ago, when the will was read, Dorothy's 2 older brothers had received the house, the 12 acres of farmland, and every financial account their father owned. Dorothy had received the grandfather clock. Just the clock. Her brothers had exchanged a glance she was not meant to catch. A glance that looked like relief, like a door closing on a conversation they had been dreading. And in the parking lot afterward, the eldest, Gerald, had said to the middle brother Philip, not quite quietly enough, "Well, that's settled." But settled was not the word her father would have used. Howard Ellison Carey had been a rural letter carrier for 38 years, and an amateur clockmaker in his garage on weekends, and he had never, in his 91 years, left anything unsettled. He had simply left it somewhere no one but Dorothy would think to look. But to understand what that envelope held, and why a 91-year-old man had spent his last months hiding things inside a clock he loved almost as much as his daughter, you have to go back to the October afternoon when Dorothy buried her father and stood in a lawyer's office and learned that he had, apparently, left her nothing at all. Eastern Maryland, the last Thursday in September. A 1-story law office on Dover Street, with those colonial reproduction shutters that every town on the eastern shore seems to require by some unwritten ordinance. Inside, a conference table too large for the room. 4 chairs around it, 3 of them occupied. Dorothy sat on one side. Gerald and Philip sat on the other. Their father had been buried the previous Saturday, October 1st, at the Y Mills Cemetery, in the plot beside their mother, June, who had died 11 years earlier. Dorothy Carey Maddox, 68, retired school librarian, 41 years at Tilghman Elementary, the last 12 as head librarian. Widowed 5 years ago when her husband, Martin Maddox, a waterman who worked the Chesapeake oyster beds, died of a heart attack on his boat. No children of her own. She lived in Martin's family cottage in St. Michael's, 20 minutes from the house where she grew up, and she had spent every one of those 41 working years surrounded by the kind of order that card catalogues and Dewey Decimal numbers impose on the world. She was a cataloguer by temperament and training, someone who noticed when a decimal was 1 digit off, someone who could spot a misattributed edition by the weight of the paper. She had once identified a counterfeit first edition Charlotte's Web at a fundraiser auction by the feel of the stock alone, running her thumb across the page and knowing, the way a musician knows a wrong note, that the paper was 30 years too young for the binding. That was her gift and her habit. She noticed things. She cross-referenced. She traced provenance. But she had spent her entire adult life choosing not to aim that eye at her own family, because noticing would have meant fighting, and she had loved her father too much to make his last years a battlefield. The attorney, a local man named Russell Hewitt, read the will. Gerald Carey, the eldest at 72, a retired contractor, received the family house on Tilghman Island, and the 12-acre parcel attached to it. The house was assessed at $410,000, waterfront Eastern Shore prices. The 12 acres were agricultural, leased to a soybean farmer, generating $14,400 annually. Philip Carey, the middle sibling at 70, still working in insurance, received the savings accounts, the pension disbursement, and the contents of a safe deposit box. The savings accounts, per the will, totaled approximately $71,000. The pension disbursement was a lump sum of $38,000. The safe deposit box contents were unspecified. Dorothy Carey Maddox, the youngest and only daughter, received the grandfather clock. A 1923 Hershey Model 250, mahogany case, Westminster chime. Retail antique value, approximately $3,500 to $5,000. Dorothy did not protest. She signed where Hewitt indicated. She thanked him. She walked out. The parking lot behind the law office. 3 vehicles, Gerald's silver F-150, Philip's dark green Buick, Dorothy's 12-year-old Honda Civic. Gerald and Philip were standing between the truck and the Buick, close together, speaking the way men speak when they believe the matter is closed. Dorothy was 15 feet away, unlocking her car. The wind carried Gerald's voice. He was not whispering, he was simply facing the wrong direction. He said to Philip, "Well, that's settled." Philip's reply came quieter but still audible. She didn't even ask, Gerald. With what sounded almost like admiration, "She never does." Dorothy's hand stopped on the car door handle. She did not turn around. She got in, closed the door, and sat in the parking lot for 9 minutes after her brother's trucks had pulled away. She was not crying. She was cataloguing. For the first time in her life, she was aiming that trained eye at her own family, and what she was seeing, retroactively, rapidly, was a pattern. Howard Ellison Carey, 91 when he died. Former rural letter carrier, Route 14, Talbot County, for 38 years. Retired at 66. He had spent his retirement doing 2 things: repairing clocks for neighbors in his garage, never charging a dime, and writing letters. Howard was a letter writer in an age that had forgotten the practice. He wrote to his daughter every 2 weeks. Actual paper, actual stamps, mailed from the Tilghman Island post office. He continued this even when his handwriting deteriorated in his last years, the lines growing shaky, but the words remaining precise. The letters were warm, specific, full of weather reports and bird sightings, and questions about what Dorothy was reading. She pulled out her phone now, sitting in that parking lot. She had photographed every letter he ever sent her. She scrolled back 8 months to one she had read 3 times without fully understanding it. Howard had written, "I have been thinking about what a clock does that people will not do. A clock tells you the truth every time you look at it. It does not adjust the hour to spare your feelings. I have always loved that about clocks. I wish I could say the same about your brothers." She had read that line 8 months ago, and taken it for an old man's general disappointment. She read it now and understood, sitting in the cooling car with the engine off, that her father had not been making small talk about clocks. He had been telling her something, and the clock was what he left her. That night, in her cottage in San Michael's, Dorothy sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and a pen and began to write down every small thing she had chosen to overlook across the past 11 years, since her mother June had died. The power of attorney. Gerald had mentioned it once, casually, saying he had gotten one signed so Dad doesn't have to worry about bills. Dorothy had never seen the document. She had never asked to see it. The account consolidation. Philip had mentioned about 3 years ago that he had helped Dad simplify his finances. Dorothy had not asked what that meant. The repairs that never happened. Gerald was supposed to be maintaining the family house. Howard had mentioned twice, in letters, that the porch railing was still broken. Gerald had said the contractor was backed up. The visits that thinned. Both brothers lived within 40 minutes of their father. By the last 2 years, Howard had told Dorothy on the phone that Gerald came about once a month, maybe less. Philip came at holidays, the caregiver switch. When Howard needed daily help in his final year, Gerald had hired a homemaid and told Dorothy the cost was $1,100 a month, coming out of their father's account. Dorothy had offered to split it. Gerald had said, "It's handled, the safe deposit box." Howard had mentioned, years ago, that the box contained important papers. It was listed in the will as going to Philip. Dorothy had no idea what was inside. She wrote at the bottom of the legal pad, in her careful librarian script, "If I am wrong about this, I am the sister who accused her brothers of stealing from their dead father. If I am right, I am the daughter who should have looked sooner." She did not sleep that night. At 6 in the morning she drove to Tilghman Island to pick up the clock. In a letter mailed 14 months before he died, Howard had written something that Dorothy now read with entirely different eyes. "Your mother kept this family honest by being in the room. Now that she is gone, I can see what the room looks like without her, and I do not always like it. But I am keeping records, Dot. A postman always keeps records. A postman always keeps records." That line drove her to the clock. October 22, 7:30 in the morning. Dorothy drove her Honda Civic to the family house on Tilghman Island. Gerald was not there. He had already moved into the house, technically his now under the probated will, but he was at a job site in Denton. The homemaid, a woman named Patrice, was packing her belongings. The clock stood in the front hallway where it had stood since 1971, when Howard's own father died, and Howard had carried it, with the help of 2 neighbors, into the house. The Hershey Model 250, 78 inches tall, mahogany case, brass dial with a moon phase indicator, Westminster chime on 5 tubular bells. The pendulum housing had a beveled glass door. The case weighed approximately 200 pounds. It took Dorothy and Patrice, and a furniture dolly Patrice's husband kept in the garage, 40 minutes to get it loaded into the back of a borrowed pickup truck. Dorothy drove it to St. Michael's at 20 miles an hour, with the hazards on, both hands on the wheel, watching the rearview mirror at every pothole. She placed the clock in her hallway. She wound it, the ritual her father had performed every Sunday for decades. At 9 o'clock that evening, it chimed, and she began to examine it. The clock, it would turn out, contained 3 hidden compartments. Howard had built them himself, and this was plausible because the man had spent 25 years of retirement taking clocks apart and putting them back together. He knew where to cut a false panel, where to add a concealed latch, where to hide a space that looked like solid wood. The first compartment was behind the pendulum housing back panel, accessible by sliding a small brass catch that appeared decorative. This was the one Dorothy found on the night of October 22, the one the cold open showed. It held the manila envelope marked Dorothy. The second was inside the clock's bonnet, the ornamental top piece, beneath a false wooden floor panel. It held a thicker envelope secured with a rubber band. The third was inside the clock's base plinth, accessible only by removing 4 screws on the underside, which required laying the entire 200-pound clock on its back. It held a padded pouch and a sealed legal envelope. Dorothy did not find all 3 at once. She found the first on that night. She would not find the second until October 25, after the first envelope told her where to look. She would not find the third until October 30, after the second envelope changed everything. Her father had spent his last 18 months, while appearing frail, dependent, and to his sons, mentally diminished, secretly compiling evidence. He had hidden it in the clock. He had arranged, through his will, for the clock to go to Dorothy. He could not go to the authorities himself. He was 90 years old, alone, dependent on Gerald for his care, and afraid that if he confronted his sons, Gerald would retaliate by cutting off the home aid, the only daily human contact he had left. So he built a trap designed to spring after his death, aimed at the one person he trusted to follow the trail. His daughter, the cataloger, the one who would notice. Her father had been a postman for 38 years, and if there was one thing a postman understood, it was that a message only works if it reaches the right person. He had spent his last months making sure this one would. At the end of the clock's base, Biscuit, the elderly calico cat who had been Howard's companion for 9 years, sat watching Dorothy the way she had always watched Howard when he wound the clock. Howard's cat lived with Dorothy now. She had driven to Tillman Island and collected her the day after the funeral. Biscuit sat on the clock's base and did not move while Dorothy stood on the step-stool, running her fingers along the clock's bonnet, feeling for a seam she had not yet found. But that would come later. First, the envelope. The night of October 22, after 9 o'clock, Dorothy opened the manila envelope at her kitchen table. Inside she found 3 items. A 3-page handwritten letter from Howard, dated March 14 of the same year, 7 months before his death. A single Polaroid photograph, and a torn page from a yellow legal pad covered in Howard's handwriting. A list of dates and dollar amounts. The letter. The first page. Her father's voice reaching her through ink and paper. Dot, if you are reading this, it means I am gone and you are wondering why I left you a clock and nothing else. The answer is that I left you everything that matters. The clock has more to tell you. Look higher. The letter continued, I did not lose my mind these past few years, though I let your brothers believe I had. A confused old man is invisible, and an invisible man sees everything. What I saw, I wrote down. What I wrote down, I put in this clock. You are the only one I trust to do what needs doing, because you are the only one who loved me without a price tag on it. And lower on the same page, in slightly shakier script, as though he had paused and then returned to the pen. Your mother would have caught them in a week. It took me 4 years because I am slower, and I did not want to believe it. But the numbers do not lie, Dot. They never do. A clock and a bank ledger have that in common. The Polaroid. A photograph of a document, specifically the first page of a power of attorney dated 11 years ago, bearing what appeared to be Howard's signature. But the photograph also captured, at the edge of the frame, a second piece of paper beneath it, with handwriting that was not Howard's. Dorothy recognized the second handwriting. It belonged to Gerald. The torn legal pad page. A list of 23 dates, each with a dollar amount. The smallest was $4,200. The largest was $47,000. The dates spanned 4 years. At the bottom, Howard had written the total and circled it twice. $487,000. Below the circled figure, in his steadiest hand, this is what they took. Dorothy did not cry. She did not call anyone. She placed the 3 items on her kitchen table, side by side, the way she would lay out catalogue cards for cross-referencing. She photographed each one with her phone. Then she sat down and read the list of dates again, this time matching them against things she remembered. The account consolidation Philip had mentioned. The period when Gerald said the porch repairs were too expensive right now. The months when Howard's letters to her had grown shorter and more guarded, as if he were choosing his words carefully for the first time in his life. The list said what it said. The photograph said what it said. Dorothy did not need a narrator to tell her what her brothers had done. The documents told her the same moment she read them. At the bottom of the first page of the letter, Howard's instruction. Look higher. The bonnet. You'll need the step-stool from the kitchen. Over the next 2 days, October 23 and 24, Dorothy worked the list the way she had worked provenance questions for 4 decades. She pulled her own records, every letter Howard had sent her over the past 4 years, and searched for any mention of money, accounts, or Gerald's involvement with the finances. She found 3 references. A letter from 2 years ago. Gerald says the account is doing fine, but he never shows me the statements anymore. I have asked twice. A letter from 18 months ago. Philip's Linda came by with papers for me to sign. I asked what they were, and she said, Just routine, Dad. I signed because she was in a hurry, and I felt foolish asking twice. And a letter from 11 months ago. Dot, I want you to know that I set aside something for you that nobody can touch. It is in the safest place I know. You will understand when the time comes. She compiled these into a timeline on her legal pad. The pattern was visible now, not as an accusation, but as a sequence of documents, dates, and her father's own words, each one confirming the next, the way entries in a catalogue confirm a chain of custody. Howard had known for at least 2 years that his finances were being controlled by Gerald and facilitated by Philip's wife, Linda. He had been afraid to confront them. He had chosen to document and hide. In that letter from 11 months before his death, he had written something that settled in Dorothy's chest like a stone. I am not a brave man, Dot. I was never the brave one. That was your mother. But I am a patient one. And patience is its own kind of courage when you are 90 years old and the people taking from you are your own sons. October 25, early morning. Dorothy opened the second compartment, inside the clock's bonnet. She stood on the step stool from the kitchen, just as her father had told her to, and pressed along the inside of the ornamental top until a false panel gave way. The second envelope was thicker. Inside she found photocopies of 6 bank statements from Howard's savings account at Chesapeake Trust, spanning 1 calendar year, from 3 years ago. Each statement was covered in Howard's handwritten annotations. He had circled specific withdrawals and written, in the margin, the actual amount next to what the statement showed. He had been comparing what the bank recorded to what he knew was true, and there was a single index card in Howard's hand. The signatures on withdrawals 4, 9, and 15 are not mine. Compare them to the letter G signed for my birthday card in 2019. He practiced, but he always loops his T's. Dorothy did what the card told her. She went to her box of family correspondence, the one she kept in the bedroom closet, because she had kept everything, every card, every letter, every envelope, the librarian's compulsion to preserve. She found Gerald's birthday card from 2019. She placed it beside the photocopied bank statements. She looked at the signatures, and she saw it. The looped T. Gerald's imitation of their father's handwriting was skilled, nearly convincing, but the T's curled at the top in a way Howard's never did. Howard signed his T's with a flat cross-stroke. Gerald looped them, every time. This was not just an elderly parent's money being mismanaged. This was forgery. This was a crime. But there was a second detail on one of the bank statements that stopped her cold. Howard had circled a notary stamp on a withdrawal authorization form. The notary's name, printed clearly beneath the seal, Linda M. Carey, Philip's wife. Gerald had forged the signatures. Linda had notarized them, certifying them as genuine. Philip, whose wife had done the notarizing, could not have been ignorant. Dorothy could have called the police that morning. She could have called an attorney. Instead, she looked at the back of the second envelope, where her father had written one more instruction in his smallest, most careful handwriting. Now look down. Bring a screwdriver. And Dot, before you open the last one, sit down. The clock chimed 10. Biscuit jumped down from the base and wound around Dorothy's ankles. There was one more compartment, the bottom of the clock, and her father's sequence was not finished yet. A cataloguer knows you do not skip to the last card in the drawer. October 30. Dorothy had spent 5 days processing what she had found, cross-referencing, photographing, organizing. Now she laid the clock on its back, a 2-person job. Her neighbor, a retired crabber named Earl, helped without asking questions. He held the clock steady while she removed the 4 screws from the base plinth. The panel came free. Inside, a padded pouch containing a Sony microcassette tape, the kind used in old answering machines. A sealed, legal-size envelope with a name and address written on the front. Margaret Yoon, attorney at law, 118 Federal Street, Easton, Maryland, 21601. On the envelope, Howard had written, "Do not open. Bring this to her. She is expecting it, or she will be, once you call." And a folded note, short and direct. "The tape is from the answering machine in my bedroom. I pressed record when I heard the phone ring because I had learned to do that. You will hear your brothers. I am sorry. Dorothy did not own a microcassette player. She drove to the Goodwill in Easton and bought one for $3.50. She sat in her car in the Goodwill parking lot and pressed play. The tape ran approximately 4.5 minutes. Howard's home phone, the answering machine's record function capturing his end at first, then both sides as the speakerphone kicked in. A three-way call. Gerald's voice came through first, slightly distorted by the speaker. Phil, you there? Philip's voice, yeah, I'm here. What's the problem? Gerald, the old man asked me about the statements again. Third time this month. Philip, what did you tell him? Gerald, same thing. The bank switched to paperless. Everything's online. He doesn't know how to get online. That buys us another quarter, maybe 2. Philip, and if he asks Gerald. And there was a pause before he answered. The pause of a man choosing his words. He won't. He doesn't want to worry her. That's the whole play, Phil. He'd rather not know for sure than put it on her. He's predictable. Philip. Linda's nervous. She says if anyone actually pulls the notary logs. Gerald. Nobody's pulling notary logs on a 90-year-old man's savings account. When he goes, it'll settle through probate, and by then the accounts will show what we need them to show. Gets the clock or whatever, and we split the rest. Philip, after a long pause, I don't love this, Jerry. Gerald, you don't have to love it. You just have to keep Linda calm and let me handle the rest. We've come this far. The tape ended with a click. Howard hanging up the bedroom extension. The note that accompanied the tape carried. One more passage in Howard's hand. I listened to that call, and I stayed in my bed, and I did not move for a very long time. They called me predictable. They were right. I have been predictable my whole life. But I have one surprise left in me, and it is in this clock. Dorothy sat in the Goodwill parking lot for 22 minutes. She played the tape a second time. Then she placed it in her purse, drove home, and called the number on the sealed envelope. A receptionist answered. Dorothy said she would like to make an appointment with Margaret Yoon. The receptionist asked what the matter was regarding. Dorothy said, My father told me to call. His name was Howard Carey. There was a pause on the line. The receptionist said, Miss Yoon has been expecting your call. Can you come in Thursday? Margaret Yoon had been expecting the call. Howard had arranged this. There was a layer to his plan that Dorothy had not yet uncovered. November 3, Thursday, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Dorothy walked into Margaret Yoon's office on Federal Street in Easton. Yoon was in her 50s, precise, no nonsense, and she had a file already open on her desk when Dorothy sat down. Howard Carey, Yoon explained, had first visited her office 18 months ago. He came alone by taxi, without telling his sons. He brought documentation, his own handwritten ledger of the missing funds, the Polaroid of the forged power of attorney, and a list of concerns. He asked Yoon to do 3 things. First, draft a new will superseding the one Gerald had helped him update 6 years earlier. That current will, the one that had been read at probate, the one that gave Dorothy only the clock, had been drafted by Gerald's own attorney, a man named Dennis Hoff. Howard had not chosen Hoff. Howard did not trust Hoff. Gerald had driven Howard to Hoff's office, sat in the waiting room, and Dorothy now understood that her father had signed that document under the kind of pressure that does not leave bruises. Second, witness the new will properly. Yoon and her paralegals served as witnesses. The new will named Dorothy as sole executrix and primary beneficiary of the entire estate, including the house and the land. The brothers received nothing. Third, hold the new will in escrow until Dorothy brought the sealed envelope, because Howard wanted his daughter to find the evidence first, to understand why the will had been changed. Before she held the legal weapon to act on it, Dorothy handed over the sealed envelope. Yoon opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper in Howard's hand, a letter of instruction to his attorney. Margaret, if my daughter is sitting in front of you with this envelope, it means she found everything I left her, and she has the courage to be here. Please give her the new will. Please tell her I am sorry I could not do this myself. And please tell her what I told you when I first came to your office. That a man should not have to set a trap for his own children. But that some doors you can only open from the other side of the grave. Some doors you can only open from the other side of the grave. That was the sentence that stayed in the room after Yoon finished reading. Yoon explained what the new will meant and what it did not. Dorothy now held a valid, properly witnessed document that superseded the probated one. But the will alone was not enough to invalidate the old will in court and to pursue criminal charges for forgery and financial exploitation. They needed the brothers to confirm, in some demonstrable way, that they had controlled Howard's accounts and influenced the original will. Yoon connected Dorothy with a retired county detective named Frank Stavros, who advised on what was admissible and what was not. Maryland's recording laws were complicated, but Stavros explained that a concealed recorder in Dorothy's own home, in a conversation she was a party to, could be argued as permissible, especially where evidence of elder financial abuse was at stake. He offered to be present in the next room as a witness. The plan took shape. Dorothy would host a family dinner. Yoon would prepare the legal framework. Stavros would listen. The brothers would come because they believed the estate was settled in their favor, and Dorothy was simply coming to terms with it. November 8. Dorothy called Gerald. She kept her voice steady, a little tired, a little defeated. The sister who never pushed back. She said she had been thinking, and she would like to have the three of them, Gerald, Philip, and their wives, over for dinner at her cottage on Saturday, November 12. Just to talk. Dad would have wanted us to stay close, she said. Gerald agreed immediately. His voice carried the particular warmth of the man who believes he has won. Philip agreed, but mentioned that Linda might not feel up to it. Dorothy said she understood, but hoped Linda would come. Philip said he would ask. Dorothy had spoken to her brother in the voice he expected, the compliant sister, the one who never asked, and he had responded exactly the way their father had predicted he would. Predictable, it turned out, was a tool that cut in both directions. In the days before the dinner, Dorothy prepared. She purchased a small digital audio recorder, a Sony model, $39.99 at a Best Buy in Annapolis, and tested it in her kitchen. She placed it inside a ceramic bread bowl on the dining table, beneath a folded cloth napkin. It captured voices clearly from 12 feet away. Stavros visited the cottage and chose his position. The guest bedroom, door ajar, within earshot but not visible. He brought his own recording device as backup. Margaret Yoon prepared a folder containing copies of the forged power of attorney, the annotated bank statements, and a summary of the financial discrepancies, to be produced only if the dinner conversation provided enough. November 12, 6 o'clock in the evening. Gerald arrived first, alone. His wife Carol couldn't make it, and Gerald offered no further explanation. Philip and Linda arrived at 6:15. The dinner had two phases. The first ran from 6 until about 7:30, and it was the pleasant surface. Dorothy served crab soup and cornbread, their mother June's recipe. The conversation was careful, nostalgic, the way families talk when the grief is still raw and nobody wants to be the one who says the wrong thing. Gerald talked about the house, the repairs he was planning. Philip asked about the clock. "Is it still running?" Dorothy said. Dad kept it wound. Biscuit sat under the table, close to Dorothy's feet, as if she knew something the brothers did not. The second phase began at 7:30, when Dorothy steered. Gently, she framed it as concern, not accusation. "I was going through Dad's letters," she said, "and he mentioned he hadn't seen his bank statements in a while. Did you ever help him sort that out, Jerry?" Gerald's response was controlled, practiced. "Dad had me on the account to handle bills. You know, he couldn't keep track of things toward the end." Dorothy followed up, still gentle. "He mentioned Linda came by with some papers once. Just routine stuff," he said. And then it happened. Linda, who had been quiet all evening nursing a glass of water, set the glass down too hard. It clinked against the plate. She said sharply, "I notarized standard documents. That's all. I do it for clients all the time." Nobody had said the word notarize. Dorothy had said papers. Linda had supplied the specificity herself. The recorder in the bread bowl captured every word. Dorothy thought of something her father had written in one of his letters, a line that surfaced now like a coin turning up in a ploughed field. The guilty one is always the one who answers a question you have not asked yet. Dorothy did not press further. She cleared the plates, served coffee, and let the evening end naturally. Gerald and Philip left at 8:45. Linda left first, walking ahead of Philip to the car, not looking back. After they were gone, Stavros emerged from the guest bedroom. He said, quietly, "That's enough for a conversation with the state's attorney." Dorothy spent 41 years in a school library, teaching children that the answers are always in the room if you know where to look. Her father spent 18 months hiding answers inside a clock. If this story has you watching the way Dorothy watches, noticing the details, putting the pieces together, then you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel was built for. Stay close. There was still the matter of the full letter. Dorothy had read only the first page of her father's 3-page letter the night she opened the first compartment. She had been afraid of the rest, the way you are afraid of a letter you know will contain something that cannot be taken back. Now, after the dinner, after Linda's tell, after Stavros said those words about the state's attorney, Dorothy returned to the letter. Pages 2 and 3. Howard's measured postal carrier prose. Unhurried, slightly formal, the cadence of a man who writes letters the way other men build furniture, carefully, with an eye toward whether it will hold. Page 2 described specific incidents. The day Gerald told Howard the house insurance had lapsed and he needed to sign a few things to get it reinstated. Howard signed. The documents, he later realized, were account transfer authorizations. The time Philip brought Linda to help with paperwork, and Howard heard Linda say to Philip in the kitchen afterward, he didn't even read it. The afternoon Howard called the bank himself, from a neighbor's phone because he suspected his home calls were being monitored, and was told that your son has power of attorney, and we can't discuss the account with you without his authorization. Howard said to the representative, "I am the account holder." The representative said she would need to verify that with Gerald. Howard hung up and understood. Page 3 contained his instructions, the operational blueprint of a man who could not fight but would not surrender. "I am going to put everything in the clock, Dot, because a clock is the one thing in this house they never touch. Gerald thinks it is worthless. Philip thinks it is old. Neither of them ever learned to wind it. But you did. You used to stand on a step stool and watch me wind it every Sunday. And you asked me once why I talked to it. And I said because it was the most honest thing in the house. You laughed. You were 11. I have never forgotten it. And the last line of the letter, the one that sent Dorothy reaching for the phone, "Do not be sad for me, Dot. Be angry. Anger is just love with its back to the wall." She folded the letter into thirds, placed it back in the clock's first compartment, and closed the panel. Then she picked up the phone and called Margaret Yoon. November 14. Dorothy, Margaret Yoon, and Frank Stavros met in Yoon's office. The full picture was assembled. Yoon laid it out piece by piece, the way a prosecutor builds a case, which was, in effect, what she was doing. The forged power of attorney, created 11 years ago, weeks after June Carey's death. Gerald had drafted a durable financial power of attorney naming himself as Howard's agent. The signature on it was not Howard's. It was Gerald's imitation, as the handwriting comparison proved. The document had never been legally executed by Howard, but it had been accepted by Chesapeake Trust because Linda Carey had notarized it, certifying that she personally witnessed Howard sign it. She had not. The account drain, spanning 4 years beginning 7 years after the fraudulent power of attorney was filed. Gerald had used the document to make 23 withdrawals totaling $487,000 from Howard's savings accounts. The money was transferred to an LLC registered to Gerald, Carey Contracting Solutions, Incorporated in Maryland, 3 months before the first withdrawal. The LLC had no employees, no contracts on record, and no revenue other than the transfers from Howard's accounts. The will manipulation, the probated will, the one that gave Gerald the house, Philip the accounts, and Dorothy the clock, had been drafted 6 years ago by Dennis Hoff, Gerald's personal attorney. Howard had been brought to Hoff's office by Gerald. There was no evidence Howard had independent counsel. This was textbook undue influence under Maryland elder law. Linda's role. She had notarized at least 6 documents related to the scheme: the power of attorney, 3 withdrawal authorization forms, and 2 documents related to the LLC's bank account. On all 6, she had certified that she personally witnessed Howard's signature. She had not witnessed any of them. Philip's role. He had facilitated by using his insurance industry connections to set up the LLC's bank account through a small business banking program, and by keeping Howard calm and unsuspecting during visits. His culpability was less direct, but still substantive. The $487,000 represented almost everything Howard had saved over 60 years. His postal pension, his personal savings, the proceeds from selling June's car after her death, a small inheritance from June's mother. After the drain, Howard's accounts contained $71,000, the exact figure listed in the probated will. The brothers had left just enough to make the numbers look normal. Yoon explained the danger. When Dorothy presented the revised will in court, Gerald would almost certainly challenge it. He would claim Howard was mentally incompetent, that the revised will was drafted under Dorothy's influence, that the hidden evidence was fabricated. Yoon said, plainly, he will fight, because the alternative is a felony conviction. Stavros added a harder truth. Gerald had the house. He was living in it. He had contractors on site. If Gerald learned about the revised will before the legal machinery was in place, he could destroy evidence, sell assets, or flee the jurisdiction. The family house was waterfront property, and Gerald could liquidate it quickly through a distressed sale. Timing was everything. November 15, 4:47 in the afternoon. Gerald called Dorothy. His voice was different, tighter, flatter, the voice of a man recalculating. He said, "Linda told me you were asking about notary stuff at dinner. What's that about?" 41 years of managing 7th graders had given Dorothy an iron register for moments of confrontation. Her pulse may have changed, but her voice did not. She said, "I was just curious, Jerry. Dad mentioned it in a letter once, and I didn't know what it meant." Gerald paused. Then, "You've been going through Dad's letters." "I go through everything, Jerry. I'm a librarian." Another pause. "Yeah, okay. Just don't start making something out of nothing. Dad was confused at the end. You know that." He hung up. Dorothy recorded the date and time in her legal pad. November 16, 9 in the morning. Stavros reported that a discreet inquiry with a contact at Chesapeake Trust had revealed that the bank's compliance department was already, separately, reviewing the Carey accounts as part of a routine audit triggered by Howard's death. If the bank found the discrepancies on its own, it would file a suspicious activity report and notify the account signatories, which included Gerald. Stavros estimated 10 to 14 business days before the audit reached the flagged accounts. That put the deadline at approximately December 2, November 17, 2:30 in the afternoon. Dorothy drove past the family house on Tilghman Island and saw a dumpster in the driveway. Gerald was clearing out the house. The garage, where Howard had kept his clock repair tools, his correspondence files, and a filing cabinet that Dorothy now suspected had contained originals of the documents Howard photographed, was being emptied. She could see the filing cabinet in the dumpster, drawers open, papers scattered, the ticking clock, literal and figurative. Dorothy had perhaps 2 weeks before Gerald was either tipped off by the bank or finished destroying whatever physical evidence remained in the house. She called Yoon. Yoon said, "We go to the state's attorney on Monday." November 18, 8 in the morning. Yoon filed an emergency petition with the Talbot County Orphans Court to stay the probated will pending evidence of fraud. At 3:15 that same afternoon, she hand-delivered a second filing, a request for a temporary restraining order preventing Gerald from disposing of estate assets. November 19, 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning. The Orphans Court judge reviewed the petition and the supporting evidence, the annotated statements, the handwriting comparison, the dinner recording. The judge granted both the stay and the temporary restraining order. At 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning in November, a county judge looked at what a 91-year-old postal carrier had hidden inside a grandfather clock and said 2 words: "Granted." Both. Dorothy was sitting in the courtroom gallery. She did not smile. She pressed her thumb against the folded letter in her coat pocket, the one that said, "Do not be sad for me, Dot. Be angry." And she waited for what came next. The Talbot County State's Attorney, a woman named Patricia Rawlings, reviewed the evidence packet Stavros hand-delivered, and agreed to open a criminal investigation into elder financial exploitation and forgery. Rawlings wanted one more step before issuing charges. She wanted Gerald and Philip to be given the opportunity to respond to the evidence in a controlled setting, with counsel present, so that any statements they made would be beyond procedural challenge. Dorothy asked for one thing. "I want to be the one who tells them. I want to be in the room." Yoon hesitated. Stavros said it was not standard. Dorothy said, "My father couldn't be in the room. He spent 18 months getting this evidence out of his house, one hiding place at a time, because he was 90 years old and he was afraid of his own sons. I am not 90, and I am not afraid. I want to be in the room." Yoon and Rawlings agreed, with conditions. Dorothy would be present, but would not speak until invited. The setting: Yoon's conference room, November 22, the day before Thanksgiving. The timing was deliberate. Rawlings wanted the brothers served before any holiday travel, and before Gerald's dumpster consumed the last of the evidence from the house. On the morning of November 22nd, Dorothy Maddox put on the same black coat she had worn to her father's funeral 7 weeks earlier. She drove to Easton with the grandfather clock's chime still ringing in her hallway behind her. She had wound it that morning, the way Howard wound it every Sunday, and she had said to it what Howard always said: "Tell the truth, old friend." Then she locked the door and left Biscuit sitting on the clock space, watching her go. Margaret Yoon's conference room, 118 Federal Street, Easton, Maryland. November 22, 10 o'clock in the morning. Present: Dorothy, Margaret Yoon, Frank Stavros, Patricia Rawlings, a Talbot County Sheriff's detective named Bates. Gerald arrived at 5 minutes past 10 with his attorney, Dennis Hoff, the same man who had drafted the fraudulent will. Philip arrived at 12 minutes past. Linda was not with him. Philip's attorney was a younger man named Kessel, clearly brought in at the last minute, still reviewing papers as he sat down. Gerald saw Dorothy and the others, and his expression shifted. Not fear, not yet, but the particular alertness of a man who is recalculating a sum he thought was final. Rawlings presented the evidence. She was methodical, almost bureaucratic, opening a binder and laying out each piece in order. The forged power of attorney, the handwriting comparison, Howard's verified signature from his 2015 tax return placed beside the signature on the power of attorney, the annotated bank statements with Howard's margin notes, the LLC registration for Carey Contracting Solutions, the transcript of the microcassette tape. Gerald's attorney, Hoff, interrupted twice. Rawlings let him. She had done this before. Then the tape itself, not the transcript. The actual tape on a player Yoon had set up on the conference table. Gerald's own voice filled the room. "He doesn't know how to get online. That buys us another quarter, maybe 2. Gerald's jaw set. Philip closed his eyes. Then the dinner recording. Rawlings played the relevant section, Linda's voice, sharp and unprompted. "I notarized standard documents. That's all." Philip's attorney, Kessel, put a hand on Philip's arm. Philip was very still. Then the revised will. Yoon presented the properly witnessed document, Howard's last will, drafted in her office 18 months before his death, superseding the probated one. She presented the court's emergency stay and the temporary restraining order. Gerald's attorney, Hoff, looked at the will and for the first time since the meeting began, did not interrupt. And then Dorothy was invited to speak. She did not stand. She looked at Gerald, then at Philip. She said quietly, "Dad couldn't be here. He wanted to be. He spent the last year and a half of his life hiding things inside a clock, because he was afraid that if he confronted you, you would take away the only help he had. He was 90 years old, and he was afraid of his own children, and he still found a way to get the truth out of that house. He did it for me, because he trusted me to do what he couldn't. So I'm here." She said nothing else. The room was silent for 6 seconds, which, in a conference room with 7 people and 2 recording devices, is a very long time. Gerald turned to Hoff and said tightly, "We need to talk." He did not look at Dorothy again. Philip looked at Dorothy. His eyes were wet. He said, I knew, and I didn't stop it." His attorney put a hand on his arm again. Philip shook it off. "I didn't stop it, Dot." Then Dorothy reached into her coat pocket. She unfolded the letter. She read the last paragraph aloud, in the conference room, to her brothers, and to the attorneys, and to the detective, and to the room. Her father's voice, delivered through his daughter's, the postman's last letter reaching its final address. "Dot, I am writing this on a Wednesday in March, and the clock is chiming behind me, and Biscuit is on my lap, and I am not sure how many more Wednesdays I have. I want you to know that leaving you the clock was not leaving you nothing. It was leaving you everything I could not say out loud while I was alive. The house is wood, and the money is numbers. But the truth is the only inheritance worth fighting for, and I put all of it inside the most honest thing I ever owned. Your mother would have done this in a week. She would have looked Gerald in the eye and said, 'I know what you did,' and it would have been over. I am not your mother. I am a slow man who delivers letters for a living, and the best I could do was deliver one more, to you, through a clock, after I am gone. I am proud of you, Dot. I have been proud of you since you were 11 years old, standing on the step-stool, watching me wind this clock, asking me why I talked to it. I said it was because it was the most honest thing in the house. You are the second most honest thing in the house. You always were. Wind it for me on Sundays. Tell it the truth, and know that I loved you without a price tag, and I always will. Your father, Howard." The conference room was quiet. The clock in Margaret Youn's office, a small desk clock, nothing like the Hershady, ticked in the silence. Dorothy folded the letter back into thirds, put it in her coat pocket, and rested her hands on the table. She had delivered her father's last letter. The postman's daughter had finished the route. Gerald did not confess at the meeting. His attorney requested a continuance. Within 2 weeks, the state's attorney filed charges: 2 counts of financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, 3 counts of forgery, and 1 count of fraud. Gerald was arrested at the family house on December 5. He posted bail. Dennis Hoff withdrew as his counsel, citing conflict of interest because he had drafted the fraudulent will. Gerald hired a defense attorney from Baltimore. The case would take months, but the restraining order held, and the house stood, and the dumpster was hauled away half full. Linda's notary commission was suspended pending investigation by the Maryland Secretary of State's office. She faced potential charges as an accessory. She and Philip separated before Christmas. Philip cooperated with the state's attorney's investigation. He provided a full statement detailing Gerald's leadership of the scheme and his own complicity. He did not ask Dorothy for forgiveness. He said only, in his statement, "I should have said something when Dad was alive. I didn't. That's on me." Rawlings offered Philip a deferred prosecution agreement, contingent on full cooperation and restitution of his share of the diverted funds. He accepted. He sold his Buick and began payments. In December, Philip called Dorothy. She answered the phone. She listened. She said, "I'm not ready yet, Phil." But I answered. She hung up. Not every wound closes in the same season it was made. The Orphans' Court validated Howard's revised will in February. The probated will was set aside. Dorothy became sole executrix. The family house on Tilghman Island was hers. The recovered funds, after legal costs, Youn's fees, and the restitution process, totaled approximately $340,000. Dorothy did not move into the house. She did not sell it. She contacted the Tilghman Island Community Center and offered the property as the site for a new community literacy program, to be named the Howard and June Carey Reading Room. The program would serve children and adults on the island, staffed by volunteer librarians, and funded by an endowment Dorothy established from the recovered estate. The house was renovated. The porch railing Gerald had never fixed was finally repaired. The reading room opened in May, 7 months after Howard's death. Dorothy personally catalogued the first 500 books donated to the reading room. She used the Dewey Decimal System, handwritten on index cards, because that was how she had learned, and that was how her father would have appreciated it. The first book she shelved was a dog-eared copy of Charlotte's Web. Not a counterfeit. The real thing. Biscuit lived with Dorothy in the St. Michael's cottage. The calico sat on the clock space every evening at 9, when the Westminster chimes sounded, and Dorothy had come to believe the cat was not waiting for Howard to come home. She was listening to the clock the way Howard had listened to it, for whatever honest thing it had to say next. Philip attended the reading room's opening in May. He did not speak. He stood in the back. Dorothy saw him. She nodded. He nodded. That was all. It was not reconciliation. It was the first plank of a bridge that may or may not be finished. The story does not promise it will be. Gerald did not attend. His trial was pending. He had not spoken to Dorothy since the conference room. Dorothy's hallway, St. Michael's. A Sunday evening in late May. The sycamore outside the window was full and green now. The same tree that had been bare in October, and the lake light came through the leaves in shifting patterns across the floorboards. The hallway was warm. The grandfather clock stood against the wall, mahogany polished, brass gleaming. A clockmaker in Annapolis had serviced it, the first professional attention it had received in years, and its chime was clearer now, the Westminster melody precise and full. Dorothy stood in front of it with the winding key, the same brass key with a worn wooden handle that Howard had used every Sunday of her memory. She wound it. She talked to it the way Howard did. She said, still ticking, old friend. Biscuit was on the base, watching. The 3 compartments were empty now. Dorothy had removed the envelopes, the tape, the documents. They were in Margaret Youn's office, part of the case file. But Dorothy had put something back. In the first compartment, behind the pendulum housing, she had placed a single folded piece of paper. On it, in her own handwriting, she had written a letter to her father. She did not show it to anyone. She did not read it aloud. Some messages are meant for one person, and the clock would keep it the way it had kept Howard's, patiently, honestly, for as long as it stood. The clock chimes 9, the same 9 chimes from October. But this time Dorothy is not holding a butter knife and searching for a hidden seam. She is standing with her hand resting on the case, eyes closed, counting the chimes the way you count the heartbeats of something you love. 9 chimes. The last one fades. The hallway is quiet. The 9th chime faded. The pendulum swung. And in the hallway of a small cottage on Maryland's eastern shore, a 68-year-old woman stood beside a clock that had told her the truth her father could not say aloud. And she wound it one more time because that was the deal. He hid it. She found it. And on Sundays, she kept it going.